If you're building a MAUI MVVM application, you might be binding your view to your view model the wrong way. So I was building a MAUI MVVM app, and I was just following some Microsoft documentation, and they recommended setting the binding context on my content page via this content page binding context attribute directly in the XAML. And this worked fine. I could boot up my application. Even better, look at this, I get IntelliSense on my bindings since my view directly knows about my view model. But I faced a constraint where I actually wanted to use this profile view, not just for the stub profile view model that I have here, but I also wanted to use it for my profile view model. But I couldn't do that since I was directly referencing my view model from the view. I couldn't swap out the view model at runtime. So I was fine. I decided I don't want this stub profile view model anyways. Why would I want to use the same view for the same or for multiple view models? That's not a common use case. So hey, I'm just going to use my profile view model instead. But I faced another issue, and that's if I want to set the view model in XAML, then this view model cannot have a constructor that takes parameters. And as we can see, this constructor takes a profile parameter. So, of course, I couldn't use this approach, so I needed an alternative. Well, if we go in the code behind, we might remember this from the WPF days. Many people did this a lot. I tried not to do it for the reasons we'll get into, but we could set the binding context to be a new profile view model, and we can pass in our profile. Now, where am I going to get this profile from? Do I instantiate it here? I don't want to because I want to leverage dependency injection in my application and resolve this profile that I've registered in dependency injection. But how am I going to resolve that all the way over here in my code behind? How am I going to leverage dependency injection to the fullest and easily inject services throughout my application? It's likely not going to work well just instantiating in code behind. But imagine a world where we could do that. Why can't I easily resolve my view model from dependency injection and hook it up to my view? Well, in .NET MAUI, you can resolve your views from dependency injection, which means you could also resolve the binding context for those views to be a view model that you've registered in dependency injection. So that's a big chain that I've tried to explain, but let's see it in action. Let's leverage dependency injection for our views and everything underneath. So starting off, all we need to do is take our services and we want to add a singleton. We're going to add our profile view model, and that just requires a profile, which we've already registered in dependency injection. So that'll get injected. That's all satisfied. And I also want to register the profile view, but I want this profile view to have a binding context of the profile view model. So in this add singleton method, we can provide a factory that'll create our profile view. So let's instantiate a profile view. And since we're instantiating it here, we can simply set the binding context to be, what do we want this to be? We want it to be our profile view model. How do we resolve this? Well, this factory method takes in our built service provider. So we can see that, oh, it's not popping up, but this is our service provider, which has a profile view model registered. So let's take that service provider and let's resolve the profile view model. And just like that, we are hooking up our view to our view model in dependency injection, which means we're resolving all of our services through dependency injection for our entire application, which is awesome. And since we're doing this in C# and not in XAML, we can swap out these view models at runtime if we wanted to. So I could have some kind of conditional logic here to instead resolve a stub profile view model as my binding context. But I'm not worried about that. Let's stick to this profile view model. I think the big benefit of this approach is just being able to resolve everything through dependency injection. So here we go, application boots. We are going to resolve the profile view. So our app shell is likely resolving that. And there we go. We are pointing to our profile view model, which has our profile injected into it, which has Singleton Sean as the name, and this 123 Main Street as the address. And we see that on the UI. That is fantastic. So easy to hook up views to view models. it just wasn't like that in WPF. I'm not doing anything magical here. All I have is my profile view registered in my app shell. So I'm assuming the app shell will resolve this profile view from dependency injection since we have it registered here. So what are the downsides of this approach? Because hey, everything great always has downsides. Well, if we go over to our profile view, since our view is no longer coupled to our view model, which is a great thing, right? In my opinion, I think it's pretty great, but we no longer have type safety on these bindings. So for example, if I change this to names instead of name, then our binding breaks because our view model doesn't have a names property. The property is just name. So we don't have type safety that's going to tell us that this binding is wrong. And this is where the X data type attribute can save us. So all we have to do is point this to our desired view model. So we can point this to our profile view model, which satisfies the view interface that we're looking for. It has these properties defined on it, and address now works. We can see that in IntelliSense. And if we hover over names, we get an error, member not found in data context, profile view model. And even better, if we start our application, we're not even going to be able to build because this binding is broken. We see this error down here. We can click it, go straight to it. Super easy. Let's fix it. And there we go. Again, we get IntelliSense. That's my favorite. I love it. And our application boots up this time. And we have type safety. Love type safety. Gotta have it. Now you might be thinking, well, now your view is stuck to this profile view model, right? Not quite. All this data type is doing is describing the interface that this view expects. So it expects a view model with a name and an address property. That's all we're doing by defining this data type. There's nothing stopping us from still using the stub profile view model instead. That works fine. We're not tied to the profile view model by defining this data type. It's just describing the bindings that we expect. We could even change this to a stub profile view model if we wanted to, since both of those view models have the same interface. I'm kind of curious, what if I really don't want this view referencing a view model? Could we make this some kind of interface like the I profile view binding context? And then we could extract an interface from this for the I profile view binding context with those properties. There we go. We got our interface. And ooh, okay, that works too. Get IntelliSense? Yeah. Cool. That's kind of neat. So each of your views could define some kind of binding context interface. And then all of your view models that you want your view to bind to could just implement this binding context interface. Kind of neat. Might be something cool to explore there. Or it's just extra files that we don't need. Anyways, back to the solution. So another concern you might have is we have to write extra code to get this binding functionality, which I think is more of a pro. I like the explicitness. And if you want this to be a little bit simpler, you could extract it to some kind of extension method, maybe add view, and we want this to be an extension method. So let's use this as the first parameter for our service collection. And then we can make this generic for some kind of T view and a T view model, and then use those generics instead throughout here. And then we're going to have to set constraints because we need T view to be instantiatable, because this T view could really be anything. So let's add a where clause. We want T view to be instantiatable. And then we also want to set a binding context on the T view. So we want it to be a content page, I believe. There we go. And it looks like this new constraint has to be last. Let's fix that. And there we go. Now we can use this extension method. We want to add the profile view and bind it to the profile view model. So a little fun. This doesn't look like a lot, but this might be useful if you're trying to register a lot of views. So overall, instead of coupling your view to your view model by setting up the binding context in XAML or in code behind, consider registering your view and view model in dependency injection and setting up your binding context via dependency injection so that you can easily inject and resolve services throughout your application.